behalf of Mr. Lovjikama and myself, co-chairs of, I'm Artemis, by the way, Artemis Javanshir, co-chairs of Fezana Religion Education Committee. We wish you a happy new year. We hope 2021 will be healthier for you and your family. Loveji and I thank you for all your comments and suggestions. So we've received many comments about having a free platform for teachers to post their lesson plans and make it available for all to use. So as you know, Fezana Religion Education Committee is in the progress of making age-appropriate lesson plans with help from volunteer religion teachers and accredited teachers. In the meantime, Loveji, Azan, Fezana president, and I are getting together to see how we can best accommodate your suggestion of a free platform. So we're going to talk about that and hopefully get it going for all the teachers. Today, we are grateful to Ms. Persis Driver for accepting to talk to us about using developmental psychology in teaching religion classes. Also, we thank Ms. Dolat Bolandi, who will be introducing our speaker, and Ms. Tashan Mistry for taking charge and leading the question and answer portion of the session. When asking questions, it would be wonderful if you could state where you're from and what age group you teach. Also, if you want to join Fezana Religion Teachers Google group, please put your email in the chat box. And also, as you know, it's good to mute yourself because the program is being recorded unless you're asking questions. I would like to ask Dolat, then Tashan to take a minute to introduce themselves so we can get to know them. Dolat.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good, I guess good afternoon to most of us. Very grateful to be here. My name is Dolat Bolandi. I am one of the religion teachers here in Northern California. We teach the religion classes at the Zoroastrian Temple in San Jose, California. And I'm one of many. I'm very grateful to the team that we have here. And I teach the high school class. I've been teaching the high school class for the past 14 years of the 17 years that I've been there. And it's been an absolute joy to be a part of this process of growing together as a community. And I wanted to also let you all know, as we are just so blessed to be able to have this connection together now, that also a few of us have been participating in activities that actually nourishes the adults. And this actually came out of the high school program, that we meet from time to time and we pray, we actually meditate and we listen to the verses of Gata together collectively. If you, and then reflect on it. If you are interested in a program like that, I will put the email on the chat box and you're welcome to email and we'll send you information. So it's info@doorwaytojoy.com. So Artemis told me I should do a plug-in for that too. So I just wanted to let you know about that. So it's an absolute pleasure and delight. I'm so grateful to be given the opportunity to introduce Persis. I did not know her. I asked that if we could talk together for a few minutes, just so I have a personal touch with her. She's just, in addition to this amazing credential that I'm gonna list, she has a generous, warm heart and a mother of two that cares for her community very clearly. And I could pick that up just in a matter of a couple of minutes we talked. So she was very, very, very generous. So in addition to that, she has a master's degree in teaching and a PhD in educational psychology. She's a current professor of developmental psychology at Dominican University, Chicago. She also runs an after-school writing program for elementary and middle school kids. She's a religion teacher and a coordinator of children's religion classes in Chicagoland area, developing curriculum, lessons, and activities that are developmentally appropriate. She's clearly passionate about what she does and is gifted in her in her profession. So we are very blessed to have you. And it is an honor to introduce her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tashan. Dola, thank you.
So yeah, thank you, Tashan. So I agree with everything Dola just said. And so with that, I'm hoping, can I get started as we're moving ahead? All ready to go?
Sure, Persis, we can start. I also wanted Tashan to say a few words about herself, but we can do that before question and answer. No worries.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I do have a few slides. I usually over-prepare, so don't worry, I'm not going to make this a lecture. My hope really is that this is going to be as much of a dialogue as possible, with me obviously providing the framework, providing the concepts that will hopefully be very helpful as well. So we'll get started, and then as we're going, I will kind of stop, request you to share ideas, share thoughts, and then we kind of try to make this as interactive as possible. I'm going to share my screen. Yep, I think this should be good. And so this is my screen. I think everybody should be able to see the slide that says developmentally appropriate teaching. I just want to make sure that's what everybody is looking at. All right, great. So then I'm fine here. So my goal today is, I have two goals for today. Number one is really hoping that we can all walk in the shoes of the kids who we teach, right? And that's what developmental psychologists and educational psychologists do. So like Dola was mentioning, I used to be an elementary school teacher. So, and yes, my background is in educational psychology. And so that with that in mind, I have a sense of good pedagogy, good teaching. And then as a developmental psychologist, my entire presentation. Oh, yes. As a developmental psychologist, my entire focus is on how people develop and change over time. And so with that in mind, I've kind of framed this presentation, this talk, to be something about how can we use this understanding and this knowledge to make it more useful for religious education, especially Zoroastrian religious education. So I'll begin, by showing you, rather than just showing you my slides, I want to begin by showing you first a quick little write-up, a few lines that my kids in my religion class wrote for me when I asked them to write about why is Zoroastrianism important to who you are, right? Because I think at the goal of Zoroastrian religion education is to kind of talk to kids and to help them understand why this is so integral to who they are, right? And so everything that you see in red here, oh, you can't see the screen? I'm sorry. I need to.
We can see your screen.
Sorry?
We can see your screen.
You can, right?
Yeah.
This text, you can only see development appropriate teaching.
Oh, you can't see the text, the other text that I'm sharing.
Window.
Okay, give me 1 second. I will share the window then. All right, so share, and then this one. Got it. All right. So let me share this with you first. So this is something that my, like I was mentioning, my kids wrote in my religion class, right? So I'll kind of just go over quickly some of the highlights of what they were saying. So I have somebody who's saying, I think being a Zoroastrian is really important because it helps me to never quit, right? Somebody saying it makes me feel very unique at school with my friends in a very special way. I like it because it's based on science and because it's based on me being a kind and helpful person. Because it teaches me to be a good person. It teaches me there's only one God. I specifically like the one where she talks about, it makes me feel, it's kind of cool and complex and has a lot of things that you can learn from, right? And then it's a part of my identity. It is doing good things. It's helping people. It's learning about different things. And I especially like that we learn about it through stories and tales, and it's engaging and it's not a chore, right? And so I kind of wanted to put that up front, not to talk about religion class is so great, but to really talk about the fact that children can be so articulate when we take the time to talk to them, right? So a lot of today is going to be about us having those conversations with children and sort of moving from there. So with that in mind, we'll get started. I am going to just share my presentation. There we go. And I'm going to minimize that. And I will kind of keep switching between the presentation, between the slides, and then a few other things.
It's still on the.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Hold on 1 second. And now I'm going to move on to this. Okay. So with the presentation, I'm going to keep switching between slides, and I'm going to and other things, other kind of hands-on things that I want to talk about as well. But let's begin with why developmental psychology, right? Developmental psychology, from the perspective of teachers, developmental psychology is really important because it helps us focus on changes that happen, right? Developmental psychologists, educational psychologists, we're always thinking about teaching and learning through the lens of these multiple pathways, right? So we're talking about cognitive pathways, which has to do with how people think, so how they think at different ages. We are talking about social emotional pathways, so obviously their emotions, their feelings, their interactions with others. We're thinking about physiological pathways, so the body, the changes in your actual physical changes that happen in your body and your brain, and then moral pathways, which is really integral to religion education, right? Morality, ethics, all of that. And so as a developmental psychologist, anytime, any kind of work that I'm doing with children of any ages, any lesson I'm developing or any kind of work I'm doing with them always involves a focus on each of these 4 areas. And it gives us a starting point to think about how to talk to kids about concepts that we are talking about different things that are related to the religion, right? It kind of gives us a launch pad. And that's why I like developmental psychology as a sort of framework for all kinds of work that I do with children. Before I kind of ask you some questions, I do want you to be I'm just going to kind of put forward 2 or 3 big ideas from developmental psychology that I want you to keep in mind as we go through today, right? Number 1, when we think about brain development, right? We know a lot about how the brain thinks and learns, obviously. And when we apply those neuroscience principles to how kids learn, one thing that jumps out like all the time, which is so fascinating, and I never get tired of looking at this or talking about this in my classes for 10 years, right, is look at what happens to your brain when you're learning. From the time you're born till, I'm only talking about late adolescence because that's what religion class we're kind of focusing on today, right? What you're seeing in front of you are what we call the synapses, right? The synaptic connections, which many of you know at Biology 101. These are the connections that are most important in learning. So every time you teach something in religion class, this is what is getting impacted, right? These are the synapses in the brain of the child that are getting impacted. Now, the thing that I want you to focus on and remember through today is that look at what happens at birth, right? When a child is born, you have a considerable number of synapses. I mean, these are in the millions. By the age of 2, look at what has happened, right? I mean, there is this crazy exponential growth in synapses at the age of 2 or 3, right? This is the reason why many of us know very intuitively, we know this as adults, right? As parents, as teachers, as everything, that 2, 3-year-old child is so much like a sponge, right? That's what we say, like you throw anything at them and they just take it in, and they're just learning so much. And the reason they're able to do that is because of this crazy overproduction of neurons that happens at this age, right? So I think, Homie, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, right? And you were saying, boy, what age is this? When is it a good idea to get started on talking about religion and all of that? If you want, a developmental psychologist would say, here, right here, get it in, right? I mean, that's the time. We know if you can get them talking about it now, that's your best tool that you have at your disposal, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that it doesn't work if you do it later. It's just, it's so ready. The brain is so ready to take it in, right? So the earlier, the better. Now, the next thing I want you to focus on is a little bit down here, all right? So when it says early adolescence, we mean around 10, 11, 12, right? So you have a growth spurt at 2 or 3, but then you have another one that happens at 10, 11, 12, right? And so Artemis, this is a conversation that we had. You were talking about teaching middle schoolers, right? And I said, oh my gosh, you have to be the bravest person in the world to say, I like teaching middle schoolers, right? But in a way, the brain, again, the human brain really has made life a lot easier for preschool teachers and middle school teachers because it kind of has kids, it has primed kids to be ready to take in more and more information, right? So the more you throw at them at this age, the more likely it is that they are going to absorb it and absorb it quickly. That leaves us with a slight problem because what happens between the ages of 2 and 10, 11, right, is all those neurons that were overproduced now start breaking. So there's what we call neuronal pruning, right? Synaptic pruning. So your entire childhood, from the ages of 2 or 3 till the ages of 10 or 11, your brain is actually breaking connections that it has made in an effort to be more efficient in learning. But it's trying to do it by breaking connections that are useless, right? Similarly, adolescents, after the age of 11, 12, right, after early adolescence, most of those high school years, again, are spent in pruning, right? It's not necessarily bad. It's a more efficient way of doing things, but that leads us to this problem that we in education, right, we talk about it as use it or lose it. So if you learned something at the age of 2 or 3 and then didn't do enough of that for the remainder of your childhood years, you're very likely going to lose a big part of this, right? That's why you may have learned a language, your native language, when you were really young, and then you never used it, and now you can't use it again, right? And so really, all of us, those of us who are teaching those childhood years, and then those of us who are teaching those adolescent years, teenage years, imagine how important your work is, right? And that's why I always put this up front, because I want all of us who are engaged in this kind of work with children and adolescents to just realize the raw power that we have. When we teach and when we interact with kids and when we get them to see and learn things about our religion, we are literally changing the brain architecture. Right? We are literally creating connections and breaking connections, and it is in our hands. And so, as we think about today and as we go about this entire presentation, remember that sheer raw power that we have when we work with kids, right? And so, obviously, the best thing becomes for us to really, if we're going to be designing lessons and interactions with them, to base those lessons and interactions on what we know about them biologically and developmentally, right? And that's the reason why this talk hopefully will be helpful. Second thing that last thing that I want you to think about is that when we think about learning and thinking, right, what we're really thinking about from ages around 2 or 3, that's where I'm going to start, and then all the way to about 18, 19, right, which is when generally childhood adolescence. you realize that kids, when are thinking, we always say we mature as we get older, right? What we're really trying to say is that our ways of thinking become more complex. So we go from something that we call sensory to something that's more symbolic to something that's more operational. So I'm not going to throw the textbook at you, but let me, I'll talk about it in context of our Zoroastrian religion class, right? This is a youth project fair that we did in our Chicago, with our Chicago children last year. The format was a science fair format, right? Every single child who came to religion class had to do a project in their, either by themselves or with somebody else. We spent 2 months creating the project, the topics, designing, they did the research, they did everything. And like a science fair, they had to present it to the entire community. So these were little kids as young as 4 or 5 years old, and as old as the oldest kids we have are really 14 in Chicago. We are a small bunch. And so all of them had to do these projects. And you can see from their projects what I mean when I say that children's and human beings thinking becomes more complex over time, right? So you have the first one down here is a project done by preschool kids. They're talking about the symbols of our religion, right? This is what we call a very sensory motor way of thinking. A fravashi is the symbol, right? This is what it looks like. The sadra, the kasti, these are all very concrete objects related to our religion, right? It's a very sensory way of learning. We move to more symbolic ways of learning where you have these siblings who've created this gorgeous sculpture of a half-seen table. And if you ever kind of zoom in, and you can see the slides later, you'll see every little detail on that table with the meaning of every little thing that goes on that table, right? It's very symbolic. That table represents Navroz and rejuvenation and all of those things. We move to more abstract thinking, where we have this project on the Shahnameh and mythology, and how does that connect to religion and all of that, right? And along with that, the kid developing her own board game for everybody to play based on the Shahnameh concepts. We move on to more complex, where we had this duo create a project on Zoroastrians as ecological scientists, right? So they talked about why Zoroastrians are ecological scientists, and then how did that connect to climate change? How does that connect to polar bears going extinct, and how does that connect to all the real world things that are happening right now? And then we have my little rebel, who was very much into the whole critical thinking, where he and his partner in crime, actually, unfortunately, who's not in the picture, decided that they were going to do a project on our Zoroastrian creation story, Bunde Hishin, and the Big Bang Theory, and then ask the priests in our religion which one they believe in. Yeah, it was fun, but it was complex, right? And so I show you this to show the progression in how thinking changes, and for us to be mindful of this if we're going to be working with children at different ages, right? So with that in mind, I'll be quiet for a minute, and I'll ask you to do 2 things. Number 1, take a look at this, right? Little kids, we're going to start with the 2 to 7 age range. Calvin, he's a favorite in my house. He's just so philosophical. I can find anything that relates to him, right, when it comes to teaching. So I'll give you a minute to look at this. But at the same time, those of you who teach this age group, 2 to 7, right? So we're looking at preschool kids, we're looking at kindergarten kids, we're looking at about 1st, 2nd grade kids. Just quickly, tell me, what are some of the most challenging things that you find when you're teaching these children? And what is it, are there any specific things that you want to talk about, discuss, think about as I go ahead, so that I'm not just kind of throwing things at you, right? Any thoughts? And I can't see everybody, especially since your videos are shut. So I think feel free to kind of just throw it out there if you have any questions.
Hi, Persis. This is Tashan. I'll get us started. So I teach the 4 to 10-year-old age group at Zappin in Philly. And I think what sometimes is hard for children of that age is you can't see God, you can't see Ahriman, and it's grappling with, but how do I know he's there? And of course, they tend to believe quite easily. And a lot of times I tell them, you know, you want to see Ahura Mazda, you see him in nature, you see him around you, you see him when you look at yourself, those kind of things. But those are really abstract concepts for very little kids that, as you explained very eloquently, they're in that sensory symbolic mode of thinking, and that complex mode of thinking hasn't developed as yet. But I think those are questions I get pretty often as well. And then how do you know Ahura Mazda is good? How do we know Ahriman is there? You know, those kind of things. So they sort of want that justification, but also it's much easier if they can see something to understand it as well.
Absolutely. And my kids often, I don't teach this particular age group, I teach the next one, 7 to 12, but I did teach this age group for like just a very short period of time. And I remember my kids telling me, the thing I remember the most was you kept saying, you know, Ahura Mazda, you kept showing us a picture of the sun when it came to Ahura Mazda, and that's what we kept thinking about, right? And it's just so powerful at that point. Good, I'm taking notes of this. So that's definitely something we'll address. Anything else you need me to address with this age group? All right, so I'll keep going, and if as you have thoughts,
Can I just, I'm sorry, I have a question. I don't teach this age group, but you know, and we teach in a collective, so we discuss different classes together. And a lot of confusion comes up. People actually think Zarathustra is God, because I mean, I don't know. I have some hypothesis, but even the little older kids after this. We just have to keep on, discussing which, what picture is what it means. So it'd be interesting to actually address that as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was the number one thing that when we decided, we sat down and to do the curriculum, and Zenobia Demania is the one, we kind of started doing this a few years back, about 3 to 4 years back, really standardizing our curriculum and things like that. That was the number one thing that we said was going to be important, is distinction between Zarathustra and Ahura Mazda. And that seems so natural to us as adults. But for the child at that age, especially that really, really early age, really, really crucial, right? So let's take this together. Let's put this together. If I were to think about this age, 2, 3 to 7, right? Your preschool, your kindergarten, your early elementary. There are some things we know about these children, okay? Number one, when we think about them cognitively, remember those pathways, that's what we constantly think about. If we think about their cognition, how they think, the thing that you really should be focusing on is the fact that this is the age where language is developing, right? What does language mean? Language is simply a way for children to control their environment. Because before this age, anytime they needed to control their environment, they would cry, right? I mean, you cry and then your mom and dad come running and they do everything for you. That's the way you control your environment. Language now becomes a symbol to articulate your thoughts. It becomes a symbol to think about something in a logical way. It becomes a symbol to control your environment. And so that's really, really becomes important. Number two is working memory, all right? Working memory is that part of your brain that is most important when it comes to learning. So even right now, as you're listening to me and as we're interacting, the part of your brain that's doing the work is that working memory. It's processing the information, it's connecting it to the previous information that you have, it's thinking about what's going to happen in the future. Everything's being done in that working memory. Now, the problem with working memory is that it's really, really limited, right? So in an adult, it's generally just about 7 bits of information plus or minus 2. That's the reason why most of our phone numbers are always 7 digits, right? Because really, before we had phones, where now we don't have to remember any numbers, before that we had to remember all the phone numbers. And our brains, our working memories would not be able to do more than 7 to 9 numbers. And that's why it was always 7. Right, so that's why your working memory becomes so important. With kids this age, we're only talking about 5 bits of information. So the first thing we really do have to focus on is that with kids this age, when we're teaching something or we're interacting with them, you can't expect them to really focus on anything more than 1 or 2 concepts, right? This is probably not new. Most of the teachers who work with this age group probably know this. You really can't focus on more than 1 or 2 concepts in your class, right? Those have to be the primary concepts, and that's it. You also can't really expect them to pay attention for more than 5 to 10 minutes. Really, that's it. That's the limit. Now, that does not mean that our religion class has to only be 5 to 10 minutes long, right? That otherwise we would get nothing done. But what that really does mean is that being aware of the limitations of the working memory at this age means that you're going to have to do things that help them expand that working memory. And one of the things that we do, preschool teachers do this all the time, right, is switching modalities. So 5 to 10 minutes of a story, then 5 to 10 minutes of a song, and then 5 to 10 minutes of moving around, and then 5 to 10 minutes. You do this intuitively, but the reason you do this is because of that working memory. And now you took a limitation, which was only about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, and you stretched it to like 30, 35 minutes by simply switching modalities. Right? And so that's something that we have to keep in mind when we are working with this age group. Attention spans. We love to say that kids don't have good attention spans. They have incredibly good attention spans, provided you're doing something that's interesting, provided you're doing something that's relevant, and provided you're constantly switching modalities. You can get even kids this age to sit for long periods of time with you, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Second thing that you have to keep in mind is this idea of what we call egocentricity. What I mean by that is kids this age tend to look at the world through their own perspective, right? They tend to be egocentric in the sense that they find it very difficult to focus on more than 1 or 2 things at a time. But at the same time, their focus is always more inwards. It's always about the self, right? Third, obviously they're developing skills, right? Holding a pen, drawing, all of that. And then finally, moral development. For kids this age, morality, religion is all about doing good in order to avoid punishments, right? They're moral developmentally. What a lot of kids, the way kids think at this age is that we have to do good things because if you don't, you get punished. And think about that's what happens with God, isn't it? So Tashan, like we were talking about Ahura Mazda, such an abstract concept. But for kids this age, the big message that they tend to get, because they're thinking about all this from their own perspective, right? They're egocentric. The big message that they're getting is, God is going to punish me if I don't do good things. Mom is going to punish me if I don't do good things. I have to clean my room, otherwise I will be grounded. Right? It's all about rewards and punishments. So now think about when we try to teach them concepts like Asha, abstract concept, right? And we're trying to teach them a concept like Asha, which is righteousness. It's not just truth, and it's doing the good thing for the sake of doing the good thing because it's the right thing to do. Very difficult for kids between the ages of 2 and 7 to understand that, right? Why? Because their egocentricity and their moral ability to kind of think morally is telling them that, no, you have to do good because if you don't, you'll get a punishment, right? So for us to expect that they're going to understand Asha as righteousness might be a stretch, and that's okay, because they'll get to a point where they will, right? And so for a lot of us teachers who are working with this age group, we have to have the confidence that they're not going to understand these concepts at the abstract level that we want them to. But if our curriculum is revisiting that every time, right, when they move to that next age group, and now they're able to understand these concepts on a more abstract level, you've got to go back and revisit Asha. And you've got to go back and revisit Fravashi, and you've got to go back and revisit those things, because at that early age, however hard you try, it's going to be very difficult for them to understand that concept at that abstract level. That doesn't mean you don't try, you do, but it's okay if they don't, right? And so developmentally, we know that that's going to be a tricky thing for them. That's what sometimes your schools will talk about this too, right? Developmental curriculum. That's what it means. You keep going back to those concepts at higher and higher levels of cognitive maturity. So Daulat, does that answer your question when you were talking about all of you working together on this?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate the answer in that, to know, because we keep thinking we are not teaching well. That's why, sometimes, I mean, not, that there's a problem, but that we need to repeat it again and again and again. It's so it's very affirming.
At higher and higher levels of complexity that we talked about. Right. And this is just something, lighthearted. We see this in the way children do art. We see this in the way children think about humor. Right? Everybody starts with stick figures. That's what happens. Different things, and there's lots here for you guys to see later. Some suggestions that I do have, and I'm going to kind of just quickly talk about this. If you take everything that we just talked about, all these different pathways, there are some things that we know work very well with this age group. Role playing. Right? Imaginative play. I mean, pretend play is like the #1 thing kids do, right? Preschool kids do, right? So the more you can bring role playing and pretend play into your religion classes, the more it's going to stick with them. Right? So these are just pictures. I mean, these are my kids. At ZSE, we do this all the time, because in our Zoroastrian Center, we have 2 curriculums. We have one that is religion class curriculum. We only meet once a month. And so this is what we do in the classes. And then we have a problem-based, project-based curriculum, which is more how can we work on different hands-on things like the project fair that I showed you earlier, the plays that we put together every year that the kids help with the scripting and everything. And so all of that. So any kind of role playing really helps. This is our awesome, fabulous teacher who is so brave and works with this age group. She's Persis too. And she has this fabulous way where she has a board that she has, which is always open every single class, right? And this is something that she has made a conscious effort to do, because she constantly connects everything that is done to what the kids have been doing. Right? And this is very important at this age group, because there has to be that continuation, the connections between what you are learning doesn't naturally happen. And so if you're teaching this age group, you really have to make a conscious effort as concretely as possible to connect all these ideas together. And she does this phenomenal job of always going back and anchoring what they're doing in this constantly evolving sort of board, right? So I think that's a very, very great visual for kids this age. And then think about the last thing, I'll talk about is, when I talked about working memory earlier, right? I said it can only take a little bits of information at a time. So consider that when you are teaching concepts like, let's say, the Ahunavar, the Yathavarya prayer, and the purpose of that, being hard work and helping others, we often use stories to make connections, right? If you use a story that the kids already know, it might work better, because now you're not cognitively overloading them. Right? You can come up with your own story, which is great, or you can come up with a new story, and which is exciting. But if it's a very brand new story, sometimes the kids' attention, the working memory gets stuck on that story that you're telling them rather than the new concept of Athavarya that you're teaching them, right? So when you're making those connections, maybe consider using stories that they already know. because that doesn't tax their working memory. They already know that. So that could be something that you may want to think about as well. Any thoughts before I move on to the next group? Any questions?
Hi, it's Armighty from Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Persis, great so far. I'm also a teacher here in Toronto. I've taught for quite a while. And I've taught all these age groups in like a formal educational setting, and then in religion classes, even like 20 years ago in England, I had the youngest age group. And I remember being really frustrated sometimes because 3- and 4-year-olds cannot sit for that long. And absolutely, there's a lot of changing modalities. And I've taught like the 6, 7s, and now I'm doing 7, 8, 9s right now, year olds. And going back to the question about Zarathustra, it's really interesting because in England, I read the story of Zarathustra's life to the kids from a book live. Then I did it again, but this time I didn't read the text. I just showed them the pictures from the book and we talked about it again. And then I closed the book, I showed the cover and I said, who is our prophet, or who are we just talking about? And one of the kids said, Jesus. So my point is that, first of all, we have so many different images of Zarathustra, it can be a bit confusing. Mm-hmm. Secondly, because Ahura Mazda does not have an image to anchor ourselves to, that's another abstract thought that's very difficult to understand. So you're right about this being something that you have to keep revisiting and keep trying to, I think, bring to their level as well as much as possible. And I loved your idea of connecting it to a story that's already been told at school or something else so that you can build on that. Great.
Excellent. No, thank you. And one other tip that may be helpful, I don't know, it helped us a little to a certain extent, was just constantly remember the symbolic nature of these kids, right? So the more we talk about Zarathustra as a teacher, and the more we talk about Ahura Mazda as the abstract, powerful force, not a person in the sky, a force. It already shows them that a teacher is somebody who I can see, who I know, who she or she is. It's a symbol. I get that. Ahura Mazda is a force. I can't see force because superpowers, you can't see superpowers, right? And so things like that may also be a little helpful. Let me know if it works.
We're gonna all have to try it and let you know.
Right, but this was something that, we tried. That's why it's fun teaching this age group. But anyway, so we move on to the next one, right? Because there's just so much, and feel free to cut me off anytime if you feel like it gets too long. But next age group, 7 to 12, that's my age group. I love this age group, right? And the reason why I love this age group is because they're always trying to trick you. Because they have now developed complex ways of thinking, and they all think that they know better than you. And it's just so much fun interacting with them, right? So few things about them that I think might be helpful to you. And again, please throw out questions that you have, obviously. Just stop me and ask me. But things about them to think about. Remember that egocentricity that we talked about, right? It doesn't just go away, it actually changes. It becomes a little bit different. Earlier, egocentricity meant I'm only focusing on myself, right? Everything is from my own perspective. Now, egocentricity means that I feel like I am constantly being watched. Right? I feel like I am constantly being judged by everybody around me. It's what we call the imaginary audience. It is a feeling of, literally, of feeling constantly watched that our early tweens, our 10, 11, 12-year-old feel, that we as adults cannot understand anymore. Right? So you want to keep that in mind as we're talking about them. You want to keep in mind the fact that these kids are very concrete thinkers, very concrete thinkers. Things are very stable for them because think about what happens in school, right? They're constantly told this is how seasons work. This is how the earth revolves. This is how things happen. Everything is right or wrong. Everything is facts and absolutes, right? Unfortunately. And so for them, everything is very concrete. So if you're going to work with them, again, they're moving more abstract, they're getting more abstract, but still their thinking is more stable. So you want to keep that in mind as well. Of course, perspective taking, empathy, that's developing, which is what makes it so great to work with these kids, right? They can take other people's perspectives, they can collaborate, love it. So much to do over there. But then you get hit with this big giant thing called puberty, right? That really hits you. And unfortunately, I have to talk about it because at this age group, if you think that as religion class teachers, you have nothing to worry about or nothing to think about when it comes to this, if you're living in a virtual world there, right? It pervades everything they do. So that's something to think about. And then finally, think about the fact that from a brain development perspective, really what our focus now moves to is what we call the prefrontal cortex, right? The prefrontal cortex is where, which helps us make decisions. It helps us plan. It helps us control our impulsive behaviors. It helps us do so many things that we expect our children and early adolescents to do, but that's still developing, right? So we expect them to sit and listen. We expect them to think rationally. We expect them to control their emotions. And the prefrontal cortex, it has not yet developed. So we already kind of set them up for failure over there a little bit. So just think about that. And then the moral thinking, which we used to talk about, we used to say, kids think about morality as I should be good or I'll be punished. Now they're starting to think about morality as being very rule bound, right? Again, that stability in thinking. So I got to be good because that's the rule, that's the law. I can't break laws. If I'm good, I want to be a good person because that is, the right thing to do. Now you can hook them in with the abstract concept of asha, doing good things for the sake of doing good things, right? So you understand what I was talking about earlier. With this in mind, then, tell me something. Those of you who teach this age group, what are some challenges that you face with this particular age group? We're talking about like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, right? So some early middle school plus a little late elementary. Any specific challenges that you guys face?
Hi, it's Afri from Toronto. I teach the 10 to 12 age group this year. And what I noticed, because we moved to online learning in 2020 and this year as well, what I noticed is it's very hard to tell if the kids are bored or if they're actually absorbing everything I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So we always try to end with a game so we can kind of test to see if the children are paying attention and who is answering versus who isn't. Mm-hmm. So we know that, yeah, they kind of heard what we said and processed what we said. And what I've noticed is that I might look on the screen while I'm teaching and talking, and to me, it looks like the kid is not listening to me. Maybe everything's just going over their heads or they're giving me a blank stare. But then I realized that when we get to the game portion, they are able to answer questions. So really they were paying attention, mm-hmm. But how do I know whether they are bored or whether they are listening? And
absolutely, absolutely, right? That's the biggest challenge of this group. And I think Artemis and I were talking about this earlier as well. Not keeping cameras on. Right? You put them in small breakout rooms and you expect that they're going to have wonderful discussions. And then you go into their breakout room and then you see nobody's talking, right? Like you mentioned, Afreed, you go through a whole beautiful lesson plan and you don't know if they were listening or not, if they were bored or what was going on. All of these things now start becoming very obvious, right? So before we get to the solutions of this, think about what we just talked about earlier, right? Why is it that it is now suddenly so difficult to engage openly with these children? Think about that egocentricity, right? If I feel like I'm on the stage all the time, and if I feel conscious, right, about my body image, because that puberty is setting in, right? I feel conscious about saying something or doing something because I constantly feel like I'm being judged. It's very difficult for me to show my emotions and my thoughts in front of a whole group, right? So I just kind of keep in mind, like walking in their shoes, think about how difficult it is for kids at this age to be open about what they're thinking and feeling all the time if you constantly feel like you are being judged, right? Number two, gender differences become really pronounced at this age. We don't often think about this, but think about the fact that when you're kids, it's not that pronounced, right? I mean, yeah, you talk about, boys and girls and things like that, but it's still not that pronounced because the sense of self is now developing in this age group, right? That sense of self is so heightened. Gender becomes a very important thing. Your age group that you're dealing with, Afraid, Artemis, all of you, is very tricky because look at what's happening to their bodies at this point, right? So I apologize for a biology lesson, but look at the mismatch that happens with the girls and the boys, right? And we know this as adults, as parents, as teachers. When we talk about puberty and basically just changes in your body, most of us are very conscious of these changes in our bodies, right? With girls, that's starting pretty early, 8, 9. Boys don't start it until 10, 11, right? The peak with girls is around 11, 12, 13. Boys don't get there until 13, 14, 15. So what happens in this group of kids is that we now have, girls who are experiencing a slightly, a faster rate of physical maturation compared to boys, right? And with the physical maturation comes emotional maturation and cognitive maturation. So the girls are maturing much faster. So this is that one age group where we have a really big mismatch between the girls and the boys. So that's your second reason why it becomes so awkward sometimes to get them to expect them to just constantly be free with each other and to show us that they're learning and they're excited about something and things like that, right? And so just kind of keep in mind that those are the reasons why. But now there are things that we can do, right? Number one, it's uncomfortable for any of us to be put on a spot, right? If somebody calls on us in front of a group and says, so what do you think about this? And you have no clue, it's uncomfortable for us. But as an adult, we just brush it off and say, I don't know. But again, that imaginary audience is so great. If you do that with these kids and they feel humiliated because now they're being called on and they don't know the answer, that's scary, right? And so if I shake my head a lot, and if I show you that, yeah, I'm getting it, you're going to probably call on me. I don't want to get into that situation, right? And so I'm going to just be quiet and just kind of listen and just not say much, because then I'm not putting myself in the line of fire, which makes sense to us. But we still want to know whether they know things or not. So one little trick that we can do is before asking them questions, right? Or before getting them to, do things like playing games or compete with each other or asking them to share thoughts with each other, things like that, prime them, get them ready to think about what you're going to think about. So something like this, I know we're running short on time. So something like this, a paragraph like this, if I had to give this to you, all of you would come up with pretty much filling the blanks with something like parents and children and things like that, right? And yet there can be so many different ways in which people think about the same thing. If you can prime them to think about the questions that you're going to ask them, right? Give them the tools to answer those questions first, and then put them in a situation where they're asked to share ideas with each other, where they're asked to tell you whether they know something, blah, blah, blah. You're going to make them feel like your class is a more safe space where they can be themselves, right? And that can lead to a cultural change in making them think that, yep, it's okay to raise my hand. It's okay to let them know. It's okay that this will happen. Right now, there are no guarantees, obviously, right? But this is a solution, one way of addressing it. other ways of addressing it is that you can kind of always try to involve them in taking greater lead in doing things, right? So I'm showing you kind of things that we have done with this age group that have worked, collaborative learning being one of them. So rather than me sitting and teaching them and showing them things to do, we allow them, we just give them the information in the class, right, during class, and then they get to read it, they get to do the research, they get to do everything on it, they get to collaborate, they get to present, they get to teach the class, everything happens in a 1 hour period, right? They have the control, they have the autonomy, they get to do all of this. And this compels them to work with each other. But at the same time, because it's a well-defined project that they're working on, and we try to do this as often as possible, it makes those barriers of girls and boys and all of that break down a lot more. Now I'm a lot more willing to share because I don't have to rely on my memory. I have everything in front of me, right? So anything you can do to make them feel like they're not on the spot will lead to greater engagement. I know this is challenging in an online environment, but that's why I want to show you one more thing. We've done the same thing in our online classes in Zoom again right now as well. So are you familiar with something like Jamboards? So that's a tool that I tend to use a lot. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a second. Okay. And all right, so I'm going to show you an example of a Jamboard, which is basically, yeah, so this is what we did. Hold on, I'm sharing my screen. You can see this, right? This is what we did with this age group in our online classes. So I was talking to them about about ancient Persian culture, right? And the influence that has had on our lives now. One of the things being, I really want them to feel proud of being a Zoroastrian, right? So rather than teaching them, oh, no, not this. Give me 1 second. So wrong screen, that's the one. Okay, good. So this is called a Jamboard. This is an interactive tool that I pretty much use in every single class. What this allows them to do online is very much like if they were in class with you, you'd give them a project, they'd sit around a table and they'd work together, right? This is something that allows them to work together in creating, you put them into different rooms, you put them into different breakout rooms, and then they use the Jamboard to create and show you what they have learned, right? It's more project-based. They feel less like they're on the spot. And what you can see here is that I did not teach any of them, any of this. I simply gave different groups of 2 or 3 kids a topic. I gave them the information. They had to run through it. They had to develop the slide and they had to teach the class based on this. So you have these 2 girls who talked about Persian culture and equality and what they know about that. Another one that talked about culture and the jobs and the economy and all of that. Another one that talked about leisure activities, and then another one that talked about inventions. And they did all of this. They came up with this. They created this together with each other in an online Zoom environment. So collaborative learning is still happening, just using a different platform. And it's really, really straightforward. I mean, you give them a link and they jump on and they use it in school all the time. So most of them are pretty aware of this as well. So something to kind of help with if that's helpful, right? Does that help with the question, Alfred?
Yes, thank you.
All right. All right. So I know we're kind of short on time. So Artemis, tell me, do you want me to continue with the last sort of older age kids? Do you want me to just kind of share materials? What do you think? I don't want to go over time with everybody.
Persis, I know there are teachers who are always asking about high school kids. So we would appreciate if you could share, and if someone needs to leave, then hopefully they can listen to the recording later.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, and I know we spend a lot of time. This is obviously so much information. But anything you can do with the high school kids, my biggest thing with high school kids would be your focus really with high school has to be on autonomy and control. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna share that screen with you. Okay. This is adolescence, right? 12 to 18. And the biggest thing with this particular age group is that they feel they need greater control over their lives, right? That's the biggest thing that's driving our older kids. Remember now, suddenly their cognition has exploded. They can think abstractly, they can think hypothetically. What that means is great. You can talk about all sorts of things with them, right? But that also means that they love to challenge you, that they love to challenge authority of parents, right? That's all coming from this idea that they are developing a sense of abstract thinking, a sense of formal logic, where they feel like they can now argue and they can debate. And so early adolescents, 12, 13, 14, very often they'll argue with you for the sake of arguing, right? And which is fine, which is great, which is awesome. Like you have to encourage that, even though it feels like, what are you saying, really? But you still have to encourage it because this is really, really good for them. But you see, as they get to that 16, 17, 18, that's when they start connecting their abstract thinking with reality. Right? So this is a time for them to figure out who they are. This is their identity development, where they're not just thinking about who am I right now, they are now thinking about who am I going to be 10 years from now? Who am I going to be 20 years from now? Right? And so religion class, if you are not talking about how Zoroastrianism or how your religion is going to connect not just to who you are right now, but to who you're going to be 20 years from now, you're going to lose them. Right? Because they are not just focused on the here and now anymore. So that's something that you want to definitely keep in mind. You also want to keep in mind that everything, religion, morality, all of that becomes very fluid now. Because they're thinking about morality not as right or wrong, good or bad. It's more adult-like now. It's more universal principles like social justice, stereotyping, prejudice reduction, everything. And they're seeing it all around us, right? It's all around us now. So if you're not pulling what's happening all around us now, from people mobbing the Capitol to anything, into those classes, you're going to lose them. Because they're going to look at religion as something that is so cut off from reality and from my life that it doesn't matter. I'm more worried about, human rights and social justice. And my teacher is talking to me about something completely cut off from that. So those, as you're working with this age group, it really is all about that autonomy and control and a sense of empowerment, right? What can you do to help them feel empowered? And I think, Dola, we were talking about just the wonderful things that you guys do in helping adolescents, teenagers, really lead classes, really kind of help with other students as well. And those kind of activities, that's the way to hook them, right? Just that's what's going to keep driving them. And especially if you think about, again, that prefrontal cortex still developing, but realize that risk-taking is the final thing that I want you to focus on, is that whole age, risk-taking becomes a very central idea as well, right? And the reason that happens is because for adults, when we're faced with risk, we kind of have that fight or flight reaction, right? I mean, if something is dangerous, you're either going to sit there and fight or you're going to just run because you know it's dangerous. You know how to deal with it. And our prefrontal cortex, right, is when we're faced with risk, adults, we don't use our prefrontal cortex. We use our amygdala. We just use our emotional centers and we just fight or flight. Adolescents don't do that. Adolescents use their prefrontal cortex when they are faced with risk, right? That's a problem because their prefrontal cortex hasn't developed yet. That's what leads them to make stupid decisions and take risky decisions, right? So that's the way it is. And that's why it's so fascinating. And then finally, when it comes to development, realize again, what happens is that their emotional centers, any human being, our emotional centers develop faster than our thinking, rational, cognitive centers, right? So for adolescents, emotions are there. It's so high. I hate you, and I'm slamming the door and saying, Mom, I hate you. And then two hours later coming and hugging you and saying, I love you, right? It's normal. That's what it is. And the reason for that is that limbic system, which is our emotional centers, have already developed, whereas your cortex, which is your rational thinking centers, are still developing. And that's why so many of their decisions might seem foolish to us and might seem impulsive to us and might seem driven by passion. So what does that mean for us as teachers? Rather than just saying, oh, they're impulsive or, they're like that, you channel that. You channel that passion any way possible, right? And you use that passion any way possible to engage them in thinking, either hypothetically or actually doing stuff that is, or activities that is going to lead them to feel more empowered, more like they are able to bring about some sort of a change. Does that make sense? Anything that you can do to help them feel like they're in control and to help them feel like, yeah, my religion can help me, bring about change either in my own life or in the life of others, you're going to be able to hook them into that. So working with that age group, I think that would be my greatest thing. And again, this is something, and these are just, again, activities that we've done. We have our teenagers helping with these huge food pantry. We were sending potatoes, huge bags of potatoes to food pantries, and they were there helping with that, right? Community service projects, feed my starving children, getting them to landscape things outside our without a mayor, getting them to design it and then do certain things around with it, getting our counselors to lead camps, any of those activities going to be really, really helpful with this age group. So that's my 2 cents on this age group. Anything specific that you're still thinking about, anything I can help you think about, I'm happy to do so right now or anytime later as well, of course.
Tasha, may I ask you to please say a few words about yourself? I know you already did a little bit, and then take over with questions and answers, please.
Sure. Thank you, Artemis. And thank you, Persis. That was really, really enlightening. And as I've taught different groups of children across the years, I was connecting so many concepts that you highlighted to all of us, and taking us sort of through that developmental journey was really important. As a teacher, I feel like I'm better prepared to think of how I need to modify my curriculum and lessons to help kids learn better. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm currently teaching our Zapinj kids from the 4 to 10 year age group. I have taught the older 7 to 12 group as well. I used to teach high school kids a while ago, and I know a number of teachers have often expressed how that's a challenging group, but I think a lot of the information and sort of the ideas that you have of how we need to focus the younger ones maybe on those concepts, symbols, sensory objects, and move more into the complex areas and the more comprehensive suggestions of connecting it to worldwide issues, philosophies, is really a great way of reaching out to our high schoolers. So there are a few questions that I hope you don't mind answering. I'm going to start off with, there are a lot of great comments about how much everyone has enjoyed all the information you shared, so thank you for that. There is a question around keeping our college kids engaged and interested. We seem to lose the older ones. Do you have suggestions on how to address that, please?
Yeah, with college kids, I mean, you're talking about, think about it as opportunity cost, all right? Anytime we're doing anything with our college kids are very, very busy, right? So anytime you're doing anything with them, I think the first thing is you got to ask yourself, is this worth their time? Because every minute that they spend with you, they're not spending that time doing something very valuable, like studying or thinking about their futures or planning their futures or things like that. So I think the onus really is on us to make sure that what we expect them to do is really worth their time during this, undergraduate years, so those 4 years that we're talking about, right? Let's say, yes, we do decide this is very important. Learning about the Gathas is very important for our undergraduate age group. Once you've made that decision, the most important thing becomes to sell it. With this age group, and I teach college kids all the time, right? Pretty much, I will say every single lesson that I teach, every single day that I teach, I begin by selling what I'm going to teach them, right? So showing them the value of what it is that you're asking them to do becomes really important. And many adults forget that, right? We forget that we have to do that explicitly. We just expect them to say, oh yeah, of course, religion class is very important. They should come. No, we got to kind of, I think the number one thing is really kind of show them in as concrete ways as possible, why is this important? It's a tricky thing to do, but I'm sure we can be creative and figure out ways to do that. Number two, it's going to be difficult to engage them in philosophical, ideological conversations yet, right? We want them to do that. But if their knowledge base is not strong enough, right, it's going to be very difficult for them to say, yeah, of course, let's talk about this particular principle that is in this verse of this Gatha. It's very interesting to us as adults, but to ask them and expect them to do that can be challenging. So again, my suggestion would be, if you're going to do that, make sure that it is connected in some way or the other to more leadership opportunities, right? So rather than sitting and just having that discussion with them, maybe asking them to take more leadership over working with the younger kids, learning concepts so that they can teach it to the younger kids, learning concepts so that they can work with the younger kids on developing projects. Like with the youth fair, my next plan is going to be, now in Chicago, we don't have kids who are older than, our oldest kid is right now 14, 15, who comes to religion class. But as they get older, we're going to face this problem. And it's not going to be enough for us to try and say, let's get into a room for 1 hour and discuss these topics about the religion. But we can get them to discuss these topics about the religion if they have to now go and work with 2 to 3 other little kids in helping them develop a project, right? And so you're going to have to become trickier than them in trying to kind of sneak in those concepts, but as long as they see value in doing it. So as long as they see, yeah, I need to know this because I need to teach it, or I need to know this because I can now help the other younger kids. I need to know this because whatever reason you can figure out. I think that's going to be a stronger way to get them hooked.
Thank you, Persis. That was great. And I'm sure a lot of teachers will benefit from trying to think of ways to manipulate that information and create value for older kids in college. The next question is from Porus, and he would like to know how one builds grit and resilience in high schoolers while tying it into the religion.
Yeah, grit and resilience in high schoolers, right? That is their entire, I mean, when you think about adolescence, you really, to survive adolescence that itself, you really need to develop that sense of resilience, right? The way you build it, the way religion ties into this, is when adolescents build resilience, it gets built because of the protective factors that are around them. And so we know that for teenagers to develop a sense of resilience against the obstacles that they will face, the parents, their teachers, their social workers, their peers, these are the protective factors around them that help them build resilience. Now, adolescents who have been engaged with religion through religion classes and have actually been successful in developing social networks, like when we're talking about that social emotional pathway, right? If we have done a good job of helping them create connections with other peers in their religion class, those peers become a protective factor. If we have helped them develop a good connection with their religion class teacher, that teacher becomes a protective factor. If we have developed, and that's something that I'm looking into doing for my, as our kids get older, creating a mentoring program where they work with adults in fields that they are interested in. If we have helped them make that connection through our religion class, those adults become protective factors. And so if we can do those things, that's the way I think, I mean, again, let me know if it works, but that's the way I think moving forward, if you're thinking about resilience, create those protective factors through your religion classes. That's what will help them develop grit and resilience.
Thanks, Persis. I wanted to turn the discussion on its head, actually. So we've talked a lot about kids, but as a teacher, I know we also face an obstacle or a challenge sometimes encouraging parents to commit to help that sort of growth in the community. Like you're saying, making those connections is really important for peers as it is for adults with younger kids in the community, or young adults with other kids in the community. So do you have some sort of insight to provide us as teachers for, you know, important conversations we can also have with parents to help encourage them keeping their kids engaged, as well as coming to community events, religion class, etc.?
And that's something we struggle with as well, right? Although, I mean, we are a small community, and we do have a really committed group of parents as well, so which is phenomenal. Like today morning, I messaged them and said, hey, can I use pictures of your kids? And they all, like in a span of 10 minutes, said, yep, you got it, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, right? So we are blessed in that way. But yes, we do find that engagement tends to drop very often too, right? I think in this case, there are two things that become important. Number one, we've realized through our experiences that when you make the children the stars of things, parents come, right? So if you have an event where the children are in control, parents are kind of compelled to be engaged. So when they are the ones doing projects, then parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and everybody come. When children are giving presentations, rather than you giving the presentation, they come. So if you want to talk to the parents, engage the kids, and the parents will come, right? And so that's one way that has worked for us. Definitely the social connections become important. You know, the more the parents and the families feel connected with each other, the more likely they are to come. But then the third thing also becomes the parental involvement when the kids are really, really small is very integral, right? With that youngest age group, very integral. Number one, because so many misunderstandings can happen between you and the kid, right? You're talking about something else, the kid understands something else. There's more miscommunication that can happen. And parents can be that link between what you were teaching and what the kid was learning, and they can sort of have those conversations with the kids. As the kids get older, the kids are perfectly capable of engaging their parents, right? So try something like, rather than having parents, you know, constantly asking them to sort of help with, no, you got to reinforce, you got to do these things. Maybe let's switch it, and let's ask our kids to kind of go talk to your parents about this concept and come and tell me what you know about it, right? Now parents are involved. So we sometimes tend to, sometimes tend to put a little bit, too much emphasis, I think, on parents. It's important because if they don't bring them, the kids won't come. But I also do notice sometimes that if you can create a strong enough of an environment where the kid feels like, yeah, I enjoy religion class, parents are going to bring them. And where they feel like, yeah, I want to go to religion class because my friends are there, parents are going to bring them, right? So there's a balance that we try to hit. There's only that much you can do to convince adults. But again, there are different ways to do it, I think.
Thank you, Persis. That helps. So this is a little bit of a different question, a bit more challenging. For one of the classes for 20 to 30 years old, a teacher was asked, does Zoroastrianism allow euthanasia? And how should they respond to that?
Yeah, there's a reason why I don't like working with adults, no offense, but okay. So no, that's a fair question, right? And I mean, you're talking 20 to 30, but I can see a lot of teenagers asking these kind of questions as well. And again, I don't have the right or wrong answer here, but I think this is a question like this is a perfect opportunity for teachers, especially religion class teachers, to talk about the fact that religion isn't, especially Zoroastrian religion, is not a prescriptive religion, right? That's the beauty of our religion. Our religion does not tell us this is what you should be doing, and this is what you should be doing, and this is what you should be doing. Our religion gives us a framework, right? Our gathas give us a framework. Our gathas, give us, they don't give us directives. They don't give us prescriptions. And so we do not have answers to micro questions like euthanasia in our, or at least that I may not be aware of. But what our religion does talk about are these ideas of choice, right? I mean, when we study something like euthanasia, something like, when parents are given the choice of when their children are critically ill, and parents are asked to sort of, what should you do? Do you want the child to go on, or do you want to cut off the life support? Those kind of questions, they are studied in research, right? And they all go back to the idea of choice. Parents who feel like it is their choice, it is their decision, tend to accept whatever decision they make a little bit more. Some parents feel like this is not their choice. They leave it to the medical professionals, right? This is all about personal choice. So from a religion point of view, a Zoroastrian religion, which is so grounded in the idea of personal choice, this is a great opportunity to talk about that as a framework within which individuals have to now make the decision based on their sense of morality, their sense of justice, their sense of personal individual choice, how to go about doing it. But if I were facing that question, my reaction would be, I don't think our religion tells us what should be done about euthanasia, because that's just not how our religion works. It is not a prescriptive religion, but it does tell you the value of things like choice and how to sort of have your choices determine the later trajectories of everything to come. But I'd love to learn how anybody else might deal with that as well, because I'm just kind of talking about what I think, but you are all, adults, you've all had so much more life experience than I have. So I'd love to learn from you as well, how you would deal with a question like this.
I'm the guy who asked that question. And I agree with you that there is no scripture that clearly says as a line that thou shalt or thou shalt not commit euthanasia. But what we develop from that, the understanding of the choice, and that is very basic and very simple in our faith. But the problem now we face, depending on the law of the land, if I apply my religion to make a choice, that choice could be against the law of the land. So does that mean my religion is giving me the freedom to break the law? That is the complexity that we had to discuss. And the other part is simple.
And I think a lot of adults and adolescents would love to use that as a complexity that they would want to discuss. Because ultimately that goes to this idea of giving adolescents and adults the ability to critically engage with your own religion, right? I mean, that's what you're doing when you're engaging with questions like this and saying it's okay to engage with your religion at this and be critical of it, not criticizing, but be critical of it. But yeah, I don't have a right or wrong answer here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we have a question from Nina. She teaches the teen group, and the age range is from 14 to 18. Obviously, the development varies greatly, whether it's cognitive, socio-emotional, psychological, moral. How would you suggest navigating that space?
I'm sorry, can we be a little bit more specific about that? As in, how do you like differentiate? I think I'm thinking what the question is, that how in one class, how do you hit all these different kids who are at these different developmental points?
Yes, I'm Nina, and I have a very small group. Depending on the day, I can have anything from 4 to 8 kids. Sure. And they vary so much in age that sometimes it's difficult to choose a topic that will engage and interest and be worthy of discussion for the whole group. Yeah. Again, when you think about choosing a topic, I would say, so differentiation is something that we do when we work with kids at different developmental levels, right? And the way you differentiate is that you don't always have to think about differentiating the topic. You can have the same topic, even if it feels like it may not be interesting to the older group, right? But even the same topic can be differentiated on the basis of process. So, your younger kids could be grappling with that concept, could be working with that concept through something like, you might be showing them a movie, you might be showing them, they might be working on a worksheet, they might be doing something like that. Whereas your older kids might be grappling with the same concept by writing an essay, by writing a speech, by, you can differentiate what we call the product, right? Which means that now you have these different kids doing different things with the same concept. Or you can differentiate the process where you are with, you're using, yes, you're using a little bit of direct sort of teaching. And when you're doing that, your older kids may already know this concept, in which case engage them in the teaching, right? Ask them to teach it rather than you doing the teaching, which means now that concept, again, takes a new relevance if I have to teach it rather than just know it. So if you can think about, rather than just focusing on what topic, because that can stress you out a lot as a teacher, focus on differentiating the process and differentiating the product. That's the typical way in which most teachers address this problem of working with different age groups in the same class. Great, thank you.
Thanks, Persis. I think we're almost at time, so I really appreciate all the responses that you gave for everyone's questions. I'm sure if there are more, will your slides have your contact information? I'm sure people could message you directly. I just wanted to add that Dalit has placed the information for anyone who wanted to join the Doorway to Joy within the chat, so please feel free to access that. And thank you very much. I'll turn it back to Artemis.
Tishan, may I make a comment?
Sure, Dolly, go ahead.
Persis, I want to really thank you for this, because I work at the other opposite end of the spectrum. I work with the dementia patients, and we use the Piagetian concept of development in reverse. And what you presented today brought out so much the concepts in how the development takes place and how the deterioration takes place in the dementia people. So I really, really, really appreciate what you did today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dolly Auntie. And I'm going to reach out to you because I'm teaching adult development for the first time next semester. And you're the first person who came to mind. So thank you for bringing that up.
You're very welcome.
This is Behram Pistakia. Can I just add a piece of information for the whole group? Persis showed us a picture of the potatoes being bagged by the adolescent children in Chicago. I want to let you all know that there is a group in Virginia called the Society of St. Andrews. And that is their mission, that is their duty, that is how that church operates. And they will happily send you tons of potatoes, truckloads of potatoes as part of their mission in life. So that's how you can get the whole truckload of potatoes to your Darimere and have a project including the adults and the children all together. That's what Chicago did 3-4 years ago. And I just want to bring that to your attention, that that resource is available in the United States.
Thank you for that. Persis, this has been amazing. I think everyone agrees that we've learned so much and we have so much material to take with us into the classrooms. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, Dolat. Thank you, Tashan, for your help. Many thanks, everyone. We hope to see you again soon. Have a great weekend and be well and healthy and happy. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.